Welcome to our September 23rd, 2019 session. We have a wonderful set of speakers today and a chance to actually chat with each other during our open forum session also. All right, next. Go. All right, just to remind you, our TLF vision, the reason we exist, this is a community of practice for folks in transportation agencies to share and support each other regarding lean and continuous improvement. And we're always glad to have other folks too. I know we have folks from other state agencies here in Colorado as well as across the world. So thanks again for joining us today. And thanks for keeping this community of practice strong and effective. Our session today is being recorded. The Transportation Lean Forum's Lean Interchange website archives those recordings, as well as lots of other stuff. The slide decks are there, things that people have shared in the past during sessions that other folks have been able to borrow are all archived on the Lean Interchange website. There's a QR code there. We will put this into the chat pane also, as well as in the follow-up email. You can see the session from July 2021, and we will have the September session in the archives also later on. I remind you to mute your phone or microphone. That's part of what we do in our virtual settings here. During our open forum session and after each of the presentations, there'll also be an opportunity to ask questions. So I'm glad, we'd be glad to have you unmute at that time. For those of you that might have trouble with microphones, you can always put those questions in the chat pane. Right, so next, which is actually what we just said, unmute when you do actually want to ask questions. All right, go ahead next. To help us save bandwidth, as well as to help us log in, we put in the mural board into the chat pane. That mural board works only if your VPN is off. So please be sure to do that. And it also just helps save bandwidth generally, and it'll help the session go more smoothly. All right, next. If you do have some technology issues, our two producers today are Stacy Stoffrigan and Mariah Wagner. They are available in the chat pane. You can also send emails to them at those email addresses. The last part is at state.co.us. All right, next. Back in the day, we're actually in our 10th year here. We'll celebrate our 10th anniversary in June of 2022 for the community. We used to go around the table, but there's so many folks around the table that we do invite you to use the mural board that we put into the chat pane, and we'll put in the chat pane again to introduce yourselves to each other. Then we have Neil Simmons from National Highways in the UK, who will be chatting with us first, and there'll be a chance to ask Neil some questions. Then we have Vincent Labella and Denise Rahm from the Arizona Department of Transportation, who will be talking after Neil gets done. Then we'll open up the session for open forum. It's a great place to highlight your successes, ask questions, make comments. We'll certainly have our presenters today, but actually it's available for anybody to ask the open community questions so that we can support each other. Then we'll have a few announcements, and we'll close out before 10:45 a.m. here in Colorado and appropriately across the world. I know many of you are in other places. Apologies for using Colorado time. It's where I live. All right, next. We do invite you to sign into the mural board. I saw that Stacy just put that into the chat pane. It's a great place to know where you are and who's actually participating today. So I invite you to use that mural board to let us know a little bit about yourself. All right, next. The first up is Neil Simmons from National Highways, Highways England. And Neil, I'm going to turn it over to you. Take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Gary. That's brilliant. Let me just get my screen up and let's start sharing. Okay, Stacey, thanks for that. And firstly, I'd like to say thanks to everyone for giving me the opportunity to speak to you and just tell you a bit about what we're doing here in England in terms of lean. Gary picked up on that we're actually now called National Highways. So up until 2 weeks ago, we're Highways England. So it's still a bit confusing for me. So you can see there on the slide, typical look of what our network looks like. We're using visual, visual management signs to control and advise the network, and also big signs to give control and move things from the network. That's just our M1 coming out of London. So gives you a bit of a picture of what it looks like. Okay, next slide, Stacey. Quickly, a little bit about me. I am the lean lead for the northwest of England. I'm a civil engineer by profession, and I've been doing lean since 2004. Okay, next slide, please. So, interestingly, how did lean get started in national highways? Well, I joined the division in 2004, along with a guy called Derek Drysdale. Derek Drysdale brought lean to national highways through his previous experience in nuclear and rail. And that was the catalyst for it to happen in our organisation. A guy joined that had experience. He was, I would say, a middle-level director, but he had sufficient clout to start the ball rolling. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a quick overview of our deployment timeline, which I thought might interest you. As I say, myself and Derek started doing lean in 2004 on national highways, and we were doing it on a sort of, a small deployment within our directorate in the northwest. And in 2007, look on the left there, we had a thing. It was a government review by a guy called Nichols. And what we found out was that something like the majority of all our major projects went into overspend by approximately 43% at the time. And the government said, enough is enough, you've got to get a grip of this situation. And that burning platform enabled HE, as it was at the time, Highways Agency, to form a team. Various things took place along our timeline. We obviously started to get people to believe in lean. And I think one of the big benefits, you've always got to take advantage of things and opportunities. You'll see there in 2012, the Olympics were taking place in London. We had a main viaduct which led to the Olympic Park. And I think 14 days before the Olympics would start, that viaduct was found to have a whole range of faulty bearings, and they needed replacing. And we could deploy lean techniques that you're all familiar with, things like last planner, we call it collaborative planning, to get the project back on track and over for the Olympics. And that really gave us buy-in from the chief exec. Okay, next slide, please. Right from the start, we had a clear, simple strategy to deliver lean deployment. It was based around the four circles that you can see there of leadership and engagement. We're going to develop capability with the drive to maintain sustainability, and also to ensure we've got a continuous improvement engine. Next slide, please. So from these early days, what did we learn? And I'd say this was pretty much up until 2014. But I think a lot of these lessons were, learned that still work well at any stage. So we obviously found that we needed to establish a top-down strategy. We needed to identify what the benefits were. And we also set targets for deployment. Setting targets for deployment is really important because, without a target, you drift, don't you? We've got leadership at all levels was vital, and that wasn't only talking about lean. And lean obviously supports this transformation of culture. And that's what we needed at the time when we had to get the projects back on track from this 43% overspend. Say that don't expect staff to do lean as well as their day job. You've got to free people up and make resources available to support lean. And really great model we did at the start was, you know, we only had a very small team at the very start. We had about 3 people we started with. But also make use of your supply chain as secondees and bring them into the business. We built a community that way. And then at the last, you know, we linked with our senior leaders who believed in lean and could, you know, give us the. Okay, next slide, please. So what have we done since 2014? How have we moved on? Let's have a look at this. Next slide, please. So we've got a team. The team has grown quite a lot. We've split England up into 6 regions. Each region has a lead with an assistant. We're also supported by a project management office, which does day-to-day admin. And so each one of the people is in charge of their region with the sort of the vision to drive lean, not only internally, but also externally with our supply chain. We also have now a House of Lean, which is based upon a derivative of the Toyota model, built upon a foundation of people, their capability and leadership. There are 5 columns of things we do. Firstly, collaborative planning, or last planner, you know it, is key to us in this construction business. Drive a lot of visual performance management cells. We have an approach to structured problem solving, so when things go wrong, we know how to fix them. We capture the benefits and knowledge transfer. So all this good stuff we do, we've got a knowledge transfer system. More of this we do, we deliver higher lean maturity with the objective of meeting the needs of the customer. Okay, next slide, please. I just want to touch on briefly, why do we keep doing lean now? Well, since 2015, we get our funding in 5-year periods now, okay? So look at those last 2 bullet points, and basically the system works like this. We are no longer a part of government. You know, we are now slightly evolved from it as a sort of separate quasi-government company, if you like, and we're in contract to the government. And the deal works like this. We are given funding to deliver the capital scheme in a road period. Those roads are identified and costed. And if you look at the figures there, in road period, we had to deliver £16.4 billion worth of schemes. We got funding of 15.2. Therefore, the deficit was 1.2 billion. So it works round about the, you know, it's a top slice system. And the same applied for road period too. Next slide, please. So what are we doing to keep Derek's legacy going? I just wanted to touch on some of the sort of perhaps different things we do over here, which might be useful to you. Next slide. As we know, not a lot happens without the leadership buy-in. That's a given. So you've got to speak to the leaders, you know. Next slide, please. So if you are a lean practitioner in your organization and you're going to speak high up, are you speaking the CEO and the managing director's language? Remember, they're not really interested in lean, they're interested in the outputs. And if I have the, you know, I have the benefit in my job, I can speak to the leaders of all our supply chain. And if I say to them, hey, what's your key function? They always say to me, margin improvement, okay? So just make sure that your business leaders can see the link for deploying lean and how it adds to the bottom line. That's really important. You know, these guys and girls don't know what they don't know, so you've got to give them the vision. Okay, next slide. So we give lean leadership training. We, as the client organization, bring leaders in-house and give them, as I say, lean leadership training. As a tip, I always recommend, always do it in groups. Don't do it individually with the CEO, because you'll always find they're too busy to have done the homework in between the sessions. So drive a bit of peer competition. Get 2 CEOs in the room or 2 MDs, and we have a simple system. What have they got to do? What do we expect from a lean leader? We expect them to continually educate themselves to a level where they could educate others. and they're going to drive this culture of continuous improvement. And finally, they're going to be a big player in the lean vision for the organization. Next slide, please. So the other thing that the team does, you remember, I'll take you back to the 6 regional leads in England. They also operate a buddy system. So each of us are assigned to approximately 6 companies each. And the purpose is basically to drive lean capability within that supplier, act as a critical friend. But I'd like to highlight to you the last bullet there, is that within all our contracts now, we have lean requirements. It's actually useful to reinforce these with our suppliers and identify what is expected. Next slide, please. Okay. This is another, I would say, you know, if you said to me, what are the real key things and been the jewels in your crown of the stuff you do, this is definitely one of them. And this is, we assess our top suppliers on an annual basis using a lean maturity assessment. We actually stole this with pride from the USA. This was it's an aviation and pharmaceutical one. But we assess our suppliers on these 10 business areas. I won't go through them in great detail, but let me just focus on number 1, which is, how does lean form part of a company's strategic business plan? You know, is there a target for lean? Sometimes a lot of the business plans I see are pretty woolly. We will have a go at improving margin or whatever, safety, but there's no real sufficient detail on how this is going to be achieved. So we assess the companies on these 10 areas. They are scored from 0 to 4, and they get a grading for the year. We then follow that up with regular meetings throughout the year to ensure that they are driving improvements following the assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, interestingly, we then take those scores and we publish them. So if you want to see the scores in terms of lean capability for our supply chain, you can find them through our portal. So this brings a bit of competition. And I think if you look at the data there, you can see, you know, how the guys started in year 1 and have progressed. So for those companies which make year-on-year progress, that's great. For the companies which are not making progress, you know, to the next year, lacking in, you know, not making sufficient investment, those are the ones which we start to worry a bit about. So that's been a useful, very useful tool in driving lean. Next slide, please. We do work studies. So you, like us, you know, those of you which are in the highways game will do a lot of surfacing. So typically I took one of our key processes and we did a work study on that. Interestingly, you know, in terms of performance, we were laying 250 tons a night with a single crew and a single paver. We could get that figure up to 1,000 tons very simply. Okay, we set everything up to prove that success when we did this particular study. But now we've improved our overall surfacing capability up to 400 tons per night. Okay, next slide, please. I mentioned that, you know, if I refer you back to our House of Lean, we had the 5 columns, and the last column was the one which was knowledge transfer. So we've got a repository of all these knowledge transfer packs, as we call them, which is accessible to our supply chain. Okay, next slide. And finally, I'd like to say, you know, that for each of the regional leads, we have practitioner groups where we bring in our supply chain, and then on an annual basis, we have a get-together with all of us, set plans for the next year. It's sort of very inclusive way of doing lean with our suppliers, and we're trying to, you know, really build those integrated teams. Okay, that's it from me. Thanks for that. That's great.
Thank you again, Neil, and everybody else from Highways England. The very first time was back 8 years ago, September 2013. So Thank you for long-term membership in the Transportation Lean Forum, and thank you for presenting. So this is a great time. We've got a few moments before we actually go on to the next session, and Neil's going to stick around for open forum also. But are there questions for Neil? I do see a couple of very nice notes coming in. Thanks, Rod, for your note. Does anybody have questions or want to unmute? If you can't unmute, put them in the chat pane and we'll talk about them there. But if you can unmute, go ahead and ask questions.
This is Nigel Blanca in California. I was in England in 2016, and at that time, Highways England, as was then, was starting a thing called asset-led delivery, which brought some services from private firms into the agency itself, as I understood it. I noticed that the Highways England or National Highways staff has increased a lot the last few years. Is that from asset-led delivery, and would you like to talk about what that's meant to your agency?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Nigel.
And explain it to the people here because we don't not familiar with that term, please.
Well, yeah, I mean, asset-led delivery was a form of contracting which we brought in at the time. This was to do with on the way we do the maintenance of our network. So pretty much we're split. The maintenance zones are split into those 6 regions. We have 2 areas per region, and that's a maintenance area. So the asset-led delivery contract was brought in to service that. And it was, the idea was that we took ownership of the way the network was being run. We'd gone through various iterations. I think the one prior to the asset-led delivery model was the asset support contract. And again, it was very much a case of handing over the responsibility of the maintenance area over to a single supplier, and they looked after everything. The new sort of like CEO that came in at the time to drive the asset-led delivery model wanted us to be more accountable for our actions and for us to be in charge of our maintenance regime. What we were finding was that we would be saying to a supplier in the previous way of contracting, here you are, here's the money, you've got lump sum duties to perform, and necessarily they weren't always being delivered. Does that help, Nigel?
Yeah, I was interested. Has this been a success, do you think, transferring responsibilities from the contractors back to National Highways? Has it been a successful experiment? Do you think you've improved your quality outcomes and so on?
I would say this, that there was, and it's always, when you're in the business of change and behavioral change, there was insufficient support given, to do that cultural change and get the buy-in. So it has been pretty fraught. And I think the difficulty, Nigel, we had was that each of these maintenance areas were already in contracts which had different finish dates. So what it meant was, as the asset-led delivery model was introduced, a standardized approach unfortunately didn't take place to delivering the model, and that's coming back to bite us a bit. So each of the areas is doing things slightly differently. And so from my point of view, when I want to drive continuous improvement, what I'm finding is the processes in each area are slightly different. And so I may do improvements in one area, but unfortunately it then isn't applicable to the other area. But I think the aspirations were there, but the staff needed more support, was what I would say.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Nigel. We have coming in from Nadine a question, Neil. It said you said that a lesson learned was, quote, don't expect staff to do lean and their day-to-day job too. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what tends to happen, I mean, you know what it's like in our field of operations and project delivery, things get pretty fraught. We're in a lot of firefighting. And what I mean there is that managers must identify to staff that actually there is, we need to set aside time to step back. It is okay to stop the line and stop back rather than just keep, working hard, that type of thing. And another thing I'd say is, as a client, and this is something we said at the start, not myself, but Derek Drysdale, the guy which came in from nuclear and rail, he said to the supply chain, if you do not do lean with us or for us, we don't want you working for us. So that was a really strong message, that we sent out to our suppliers. But it is essential that you identify that you are going to have to allow your staff time to do lean. And you'll reap the benefits. I mean, a lot of the time when people don't know about lean, it just seems so counterintuitive to stop things, step back and assess. Does that help?
Boy, it sure does. Of course, Nadine, I would ask you whether that's what you're looking for also. And appreciate that. You need to have time to improve as well as time to, to do the day-to-day work. All right. I don't see anything else coming in from the chat pane. And it's Nadine says, yes, that's great for you, Neil, except several other kudos. Thanks again. Please do stick around for the ADOT presentation and open forum. And we may have some additional questions then. All right.
Yeah, great.
All right, thanks. Next up are our friends from Arizona Department of Transportation. Vincent Labella and Denise Rahm have some wonderful stuff to talk to you about innovation and improvement in the Grand Canyon state. So Vincent and Denise, please take it away.
Well, thank you, Gary. So while I wait for Denise to pull up the slide, thanks, Denise. So I go by Vinny. So Vinny Labella and Denise Rahm, we work for the Office of Continuous Improvement at the Arizona Department of Transportation. And just some little bit of context, the state of Arizona, about 33,000 people are on an AMS journey. We have about 3,600 at ADOT, and we're in year 6. We started out in 2016. Next slide, please, just to give a little background. With that in mind, in year 6, right? So we've also, I think, fortified and improved our strategic planning process. And our strategic plan is outlined here for this fiscal year starting in July. And you can see that we have 4 strategic objectives and then 11 strategic annual action items. Right, so that gives some context. I want you to focus on strategic objective number 3, improving core process reliability. Within that, today specifically, we're going to talk about 3.4, mapping core business process. Right. So this is our strategic annual actions. We've established a PDCA approach to this, which we'll talk about, establishing PDCA work groups that represent the divisions and groups across the agency and lean facilitators to keep us on track, make progress on these annual actions and report back. Next slide, please, Denise. So to flesh out a little bit process mapping, to map core processes, we advanced it to every business unit will map one core business process and use it to inform standard work improvement. Right, so this was really not about compliance, get a map in. This is not about mapping the whole value stream. The focus has really been about managers and supervisors understanding their business, achieving results through processes and process improvement. And we identified gaps over the 6 years by self-assessing that we weren't establishing and making visible standard work in the way we want to do as a launch point for Kaizen. So hopefully that's what we'll achieve and are starting to achieve in this initiative. Next slide, please. So why did we pick this a little more in depth? We wanted to really build a problem-solving muscle. So our motto at this agency, our director's motto, is everybody, every day, solving problems everywhere, right? So we want 3,600 people engaged in problem solving, focused on processes. So we're hoping that this initiative will do that, focusing teams to map their core processes to drive this improvement. And then this connection to Kaizen Challenge. I think it's 5 years now, we've had an annual Kaizen challenge. And the common theme throughout the 5 years has been different specifics, was to get everyone to do at least 1 to 2 Kaizens, right? So that's 70 to 200, right? Focused on their processes. We wanted to refocus on core work, the most important business processes. That's what this focus on core processes. We've had documented over 30,000 Kaizens since then, right? But we want to really have them have an impact to the business and this focus on core work, as well as to build a problem-solving muscle to the most important work the team does. Again, and then we did this to strategic planning and PDCA approach, right? So we can continue to communicate and consolidate business goals and apply the PDCA cycle to achieve these goals and assure progress. And this was different than our past strategic planning, that we didn't establish these teams and keep an eye on it in our business reviews and at the highest level, strategic A3s by division leaders. Next slide, please. So here's our approach through the PDCA team. So Denise and I facilitate the 3.4 team. I think we had 12 to 13 members besides us, representing the largest parts of the agency. The transportation division within ADOT is about half the agency. We have 3 representatives from that part of the agency. We have MVD, the motor vehicle divisions, our next largest. We have folks from that part. So almost every group of division is represented, so that we can work together to use PDCA, step problem solving, to meet our goals. And a high level approach, we wanted to establish clear targets. We want to explain why process mapping is important. Prepare teams to map successfully, create and provide a capture tool, and then determine established metrics. And all these were established by the team, right? So we were motivated to help the director achieve his goal for the agency. One thing, and Denise is going to follow up with details on how with our Google site in a moment to talk about how we shared these targets and other activities. But a key thing here in preparing teams to map successfully. So at ADOT, we have the Office of Continuous Improvement, but we also have embedded lean coaches. So for the 3,600 folks at ADOT, we have about 20 embedded coaches. And we feel comfortable that coaches can map processes, but we really designed this so that managers can own it and supervisors. So we've identified 472 individual business units who have agreed to leadership to conduct a map and then standard work and then improve the standard work. But we try to prepare guidance, standards, training tools, et cetera, so that they can feel comfortable and confident to map themselves, because we want this to be a recurring activity, right? So everything we talk about here and what we're measuring is our success in this. How can we embed this in a different way than we've been able to do over 6 years? Next slide, please. So here's what 3 deliverables. We said we want the targets. Every business unit will map their core business process for their unit, and it's due in about a week. So it's 7 calendar days. So far, I don't know, Denise, did you check the number this morning?
I did not have a chance.
I think so. So of the 472 that are due, we were approaching 300 as of yesterday, right? So that's where we're at. So we're measuring. The second deliverable is to document standard work for executing that process, and that's due at the end of November, right? So we want them to map the current as-is process and then document the standard work as a launch point for Kaizen continuous improvement, right? And then the third deliverable is to document that improved standard work by the end of January. Next slide, please. Right, so we talk about this. This is an example, an artifact of how we're trying to make people understand the importance of the benefits of mapping and why we're instituting this on behalf of the director. So this is just an example, right? We talk about lean is about standardizing the work processes to make problems visible, develop critical thinking ability. All right, so we can solve problems and improve work processes. And Neil mentioned firefighting, right? We suffer from firefighting as well. So the more we can get away from firefighting and spending time solving problems that are impacting our processes, the better. So this is just an artifact. We've done lunch and learns and open forums, and then when Denise shows you our Google site, these are the kind of things that are on there. As an example, if we keep reiterating the why, the purpose. Next slide, please. right, so I'm going to turn it over to Denise here, but hopefully as she does this, and she'll do it much better than I can, it'll show you some of the countermeasures on the site to try to achieve those deliverables and to match our approach. Over to you, Denise.
Okay, thank you, Vinny. Okay, so what the PDCA team developed was on our internal ADOT site. We wanted to make a tool very easy and accessible with resources, a dashboard so they could see how the groups were trending, where they were at with their submissions, and then the reporting document and some FAQs. We just wanted this kind of one-stop shop. And so because as a state agency in Arizona, we're on a Google platform. So Google Sites was a tool that the team decided to use. So you see right here in this screenshot, that's the image that when we're on our internal site, staff can go there. And that very first one, we wanted it really easy, bold to see. So that's where they'll click on to go to this Google site where this is kind of this one-stop shop for everybody. So I'm going to switch screens. So hopefully this is gonna work. All right. Are you seeing the process mapping site?
Yeah.
Yay, okay, it worked. Okay, so this is the Google site that we created internally. This is the home page. So you'll see it was strategically designed just for this process mapping initiative. So when you get to the first page there, it welcomes you and you've got links here that you can easily go to whatever you're looking for. So we have a dashboard, we have step-by-step guidance, videos and resources, the submission form, FAQs, and then schedule of events. You also can click at the links at the top. So again, we're just trying to make this as easy as possible for people to go in and get the information they were looking for seamlessly. If you scroll down on the home page, this is where you'll see our dashboard. So you get kind of an image there of how we're trending. And this has the 3 deliverables right here that Vinny had talked about. So you can see our first deliverable with process mapping. It's showing we're at about 60% right now. So this is what we'll be watching probably increase the next couple of days as we're getting close to that due date. You'll see there's a Kaizen Total. So when they submit, if they have completed all 3 of the deliverables, we ask if there were Kaizens associated with it. So it's also given a count for us on Kaizens. And you scroll down to the bottom, it gives you the specific database for everything that's been submitted so far. And we'll go into that in a future slide here. I'll go through in a little bit more detail about the dashboard specifically. But that's kind of that one-stop shop right there on that home page. Then the next page takes us to the how-to. So again, trying to keep things simple as possible. The PDCA team put together a slide deck. And it wasn't meant as a training tool, but it was meant to be a resource encompassing from the beginning to the very end of process mapping all of the steps. So we created it in a slide deck or a PowerPoint presentation with speaker notes to kind of make it an easy resource tool for people to go to. So the first one, the how-to, is the start to finish of the process. So it's a little bit bigger, and it was designed so that no matter where anyone was with their knowledge base could go to these resources and find what they needed. You'll see there is an addition we added to this because the PDCA team meets once a week. So we're constantly evaluating and getting feedback from our other team members of what are you hearing? What are people experiencing? One of the things we got back is people were confused how to print it. So this was a recent addition to provide instructions how to print. So still trying to find ways that we can improve ourselves. Then we broke the main deck, the how-to, into bite-sized chunks. So one of the tools we talked about when we talked about process mapping was a SciPoc. And so we broke it out into a smaller slide deck that if someone just needed information of how do I do a SciPoc, they could easily go to this document. You can see it's only 7 pages and it'll give them the information on how to do a SciPoc. We provided one on how to facilitate a mapping exercise. So kind of those tips and tricks and techniques and what to prepare for, what are some questions you want to ask, things like that. We also provided the standard work documentation for process mapping, so it gave them the quick, easy steps of how to process map, and then also how to measure your process. So we gave them some information on how to develop their metrics, how to look at their maps. Then on the next page is where we have videos and resources, because some people don't like to read. And if you have the chance to watch a quick video, yeah, I'll take that one. So on here, we have a couple videos. These are actually, these first two are from Lane, Ohio. They're great little snippets. They're like 4-minute bite-sized chunk. So the first one gives an overview of process mapping. The second one is an overview of SIPOC. So they're nice little bite-sized chunks. Vinny and I did 3 different lunch and learns. So at ADOT, we have the opportunity to twice a month, we'll offer different lunch and learns on a variety of topics, but it's an opportunity for all of ADOT to sit down at their desk, have lunch, and also learn something. So in the virtual environment, it's worked very successfully. We've done 3 specifically to process mapping. Before the PDCA team launched, we did one right here. This very first one was just an overview. So high level overview, kind of preparing people a little bit because they did know this was coming. And then we have some other videos on here. We recommend keeping the mapping very simple. So Jamboard is an activity, a tool that we use frequently because we're on the Google platform. So it's very simple to use. So Vinny did a mapping activity and we just wanted to kind of have a tool that somebody could go on and look. It is the full mapping exercise, so it is about an hour, but you can go on and click and get a little bit of it, or you can watch the whole thing. But the second process mapping lunch and learn that we did was talking more specifically about the how-tos. So we went a little more in depth of the actual process mapping itself. And then we recently did one back in beginning of September and kind of focusing on the lessons learned so far. We knew we were getting close to that due date. So we wanted to kind of give it the opportunity to get some feedback from the people and teams that have been mapping to see what they're experiencing. And that gave us time to make any changes or additions that we needed based on what their needs were in using our tools and resources that we currently had available. We also had a video on here of how to use the Jamboard. So it's a really quick, in case we had anyone that wasn't familiar with that tool. And then also just some really quick best practices, because again, we were really focusing on keeping it simple. You know, our message was really about use the sticky notes and use a whiteboard and markers, or, you know, use a virtual whiteboard, but keeping it simple. All right, so I'll go over to our next page, which was actually where you would submit the work that has been completed. So this, again, on the Google platform, we created a Google form. It's broken into 3 parts. So as they're working through the process, they can submit. So it wasn't you finish all 3 and submit at one time. What the idea was is when they completed the process map, they would go into the form, enter the process map information, submit that, and they get an email back that links them back into the form so that when they have the standard work done, they can go back in, add the standard work, again, submit, and they would do the same thing with the revised standard work. So it allowed that flexibility, and that Google form is what is feeding into our dashboard that you saw on the very first page there. So we've added some more direction, you know, just from experience and feedback. It wasn't intuitive where they needed to click on the form to click through it. So we've added some more. We added the reminder of the deliverables, always keeping those dates in front of everybody. So then next we go into FAQ. So the PDCA team, in their testing of the tools that we had developed with their own teams and asking their divisions and work groups to help with the testing, we found we had some frequently asked questions. So we developed some of those and some brief information that if somebody had questions, they could go to here first, maybe finding their answer. If not, we have a list of our mapping ambassadors, and these are our team members for this PDCA team. So they were another point of reference for them. And then also we had an email down here so that if anyone had questions and they couldn't find their answers, they could email our continuous improvement office. And the last page we have on here is our schedule of events. So one of the things that we also did with our communication with this team is we provided open houses. So they weren't real high attendance in those. I think it's possibly some confusion on what we meant by having an open house. But it gave another forum, another opportunity for people to ask questions, specifically questions they had. So we'll continue to offer those because we do have attendance, and we'll promote kind of really what they are. And then when we have lunch and learns, we post that information on here, which right now we don't have anything scheduled, but the lunch and learns have been very successful for us. So I'm sure we'll be continuing on offering those because we are getting some really great feedback for potential countermeasures for the site and information that we're putting out there. Right. So that is our site. So I'm going to switch us back to the presentation here. Let's see if I can successfully do this. All right, are we back, Vinny?
Yes, can you go to the next slide?
Yay, I did it. I'm so excited. Okay, so this screen here is just kind of, again, giving that other example of the messaging that we're really trying to convey. It was a lot of that, what's in it for me. So we were really trying to answer that question and help people understand, especially the team leaders that were going to be facilitating these process mappings, so they had the tools and resources to really focus on the value of this activity. So this is just an example of one of the slides that we used in our lunch and learn to really help convey that message. All right, so this is the dashboard that you saw on our homepage. And this is really how right now we are measuring. So as you know, we're getting close to our very first deliverable. And so this particular dashboard has been our quantity measure. So, we know we have a number of 472 that we're expecting, and we're looking at, are they submitted? Are they coming in? So this is right now our quantity measure. You'll see it breaks it down into the deliverables. And then also you'll see there on the right-hand side, it also has it specific to the divisions. So a division leader could go in and quickly look to see how his division was progressing with those deliverables as well. So the team currently right now is looking at that quantity measure for these process maps. And that's what's really great about this dashboard that was created is on that lower portion, it's our whole database of everything that has been submitted. So it allows you to go in and you can click on those links. And if you want to see their process map, you can click on that and it'll pull that up. So right now what the PDCA team is looking at what do we mean by a quality map? So we're testing, we've created some ideas, some tools. We're currently testing those right now. So there's kind of more to come on that. We haven't got it figured out. We haven't released anything yet, but we're in that testing phase of what that quantity measure is going to look like. All right, Vinny, back to you.
Thank you, Denise. So I've been trying to answer questions in the chat, and I'll return to it after I speak a little bit. So some of the lessons learned. So keep in mind, we launched officially the implementation phase of our countermeasures, step 6, in mid-July, right? So we're about 2 months in, and our first deliverable is due soon, as you know. So far, what have we learned? So to our chagrin, I suppose, even though in our mind we did everything we can, and that this is in the lunch and learns, in our documents, in our communication to leaders and managers, directly through email, and also we have internal communication tools. Every month there's 4 different newsletters that go to, some go to just managers, some go to A.all. We've used them consistently, and the primary message has been, go to the site, please. We've done a lot of work as a PDCA team to provide you tools and resources, and that we're willing to, of course, tweak them and improve them. But please go there as a starting point. And one of the lessons is people have not gone in the numbers we have. We're trying to figure out through problem solving why that is. But we continue to drive people there because the feedback is when they use the slides or the videos, depending on their learning style, that has been successful. So the biggest gap has been people not knowing or utilizing what's there. So yesterday we have a coach community practice. Again, we keep emphasizing, please send people to the site. So that's been one lesson learned. Second bullet talks about confusion about what a process map is. So I could tell you, we've done lean leader training. Probably about 250 of the senior and executive team have had the most robust training, and that included value stream mapping. So that's a limited number of folks, but also we haven't done process mapping particularly. So it's not that surprising. So we did our best to remove confusion and focus on that in the SIPOC that Denise showed, right, to help people with the bookends. And we want people to focus on the core work of individual frontline units. Then the second part of that is where it fits in PDCA, right? In other words, the way we teach it, at least, right, process mapping and Gemba walks are primary tools to use in step 2, where we break down and understand the process. And again, as often used in root cause analysis, right? So that there was this confusion of process mapping, is it PDCA, where it fits in PDCA? So we're countermeasuring those things. And then scheduling challenges. This is a common issue, right? Again, Neil mentioned firefighting, right? So we engage in firefighting ourselves, always putting out fires, and it's been difficult to assign a scheduled time for this important improvement work. But those are some of the challenges we've seen. And I'm sure if we go deeper, you know, there's some reticence, a new thing, but where it's been pushed by leaders, where leaders are keeping a focus on it, like some groups, our enforcement and compliance division, that's our own police force, they've completed every one of their maps and are en route to standard work. Our group, with small group, we've completed our maps, and some teams, some groups are doing very, very well with this, with the focus that their leaders put on it as well. Next slide. And of course, there's been successes. We'll keep trying to mine this data, but in talking to people and our team members, reaching out and talking and being ambassadors, and people reaching out and telling us they are getting these aha moments. They are saying, well, this has been really good. It doesn't take as long as we thought. We've collaboration is built. We've learned. If anyone's done this, you say, oh my God, Denise, you do that in the process? I wasn't aware of that. So people are having these moments, and it's setting them up successfully to starting to document their standard work. Or if they had standard work, realizing there were gaps in it in either adherence or it's changed over time. Just what we want to learn. The process mapping site, again, when people go, people like it. So it's just about driving people there. And Kaizen. So you can see the number, are in the 40s already of documented Kaizens. We are confident this will drive lots. So once people go to standard work version 1 and then the improved standard work, that's going to be ripe with at least one Kaizen. And you guys probably agree, multiple Kaizens generally. And if we can get those documented and people understand, all right, you map it, you see where the gaps are, you standardize it, right? And as Teichiona would say, right, there could be no improvement without standardization. We're trying to drive that home. But Kaizens are already starting to come in, and that's a key to our implementation this year. Next slide is a question. Oh, okay. So this is a slide Denise has put together. It's really to help people focus on, you know, the why and how mapping the current state can help with Kaizen, right? Continuous improvement Kaizen. All right. So this is our little graph here. In other words, we're trying to connect the dots with big intention. This is again, wrapping it in why we're doing this, why this is important. You know, can help communicate, can help the team really understand, build a common language. It establishes standard work, which of course is great for existing team members and new team members, and it's great for leaders who want to Gemba walk and understand the work that is supposed to be happening, and is it happening that way? Again, a training tool, and again, a launch point for process improvement, which of course is the linchpin, right? Respect for people and continuous improvement, Kaizen, are our two pillars. Many of you probably share the same ones. And we think this initiative done right is an example of respect for people, right? Improving processes that people work in is a sign of respect versus letting them languish in ineffective or broken processes. And then it drives improvement. So the hope and the plan is this will help the two pillars become real in people's minds. And this is our little graph to help people understand that. Denise, anything to add for open up the questions?
No, I don't think so.
All right, Vinny and Denise, thanks. Great stuff. There's some very, and Vinny, as you've seen, and you've been answering questions, appreciate that. Some very nice compliments in the chat pane There are a number of questions. And actually, I'll start off with one. A number of folks would love to get their hands on the resources, and your Google site is clearly behind your firewall. Definitely understand that. Are there some of these things that we might be able to put onto the Lean Interchange, which is our website for the Transportation Lean Forum? Download some and put them out there for folks to use. Is that a possibility, Denise and Vinny?
So Gary, I think so. I'd say let's take it under the hood with Kismet Weiss, our administrator. There's evidence that we stole and borrowed from Lean, Ohio, right? So where we take, we like to give as well. So let's talk about how we can do that. We'd definitely like to share resources that we can.
And that's great. And we've definitely stolen from borrowed, honorably borrowed, right? Yes. From Lean, Ohio. All right, that's great. For those of you that can unmute, go ahead and unmute, ask questions to our ADOT presenters here. If you can't, send some things in the chat pane and we'll read those out for you. Do you have some questions for the folks in the Grand Canyon State?
A question here from MnDOT, Minnesota COT. Just wondering, are you doing a lot of this process mapping virtually in today's work at home environment?
So great question. I can tell you that connect some dots here. So we have about 30% of the workforce and every given day working remotely or virtually. Now, that's not the same people all the time, but of the 3,600, some people are coming to office 2 days. So we have a huge remote workforce right now, and that's a change as a result of COVID. So definitely, I'd say the bulk of them are done virtually entirely or a mixture. Like we also said, you can have some people in the office and use a virtual Jamboard. So we're on a Google platform. So we encourage people to use the Google Jamboard. We have training on it. And the MVD team unit is probably the team that mostly is doing them in person. They have an internal setup that they come together 1 or 2 Wednesdays a month. They close down the office for 4 hours for training purposes, and they've done some of these in person. I'd say the bulk of the rest of the agency is doing them virtually or a hybrid, or at least some people might be calling in and some people might be in the office. So if that's helpful.
Thank you. So a lot of your training materials then are geared towards this happening virtually?
Yeah, in the slide deck that Denise showed, the detail, the longest one has like 90-something slides. You can go right to the slide, the portion of the slide deck that talks about using a Jamboard and walking people through it.
Wonderful, thank you.
Denise and Vinny, there's one coming in from David on the chat pane. Have leadership participated in this program?
So we spent a lot of time as a team identifying what is a business unit. That might seem funny, but we have like almost 800 supervisors and managers, including the senior leadership in that 800 of the 3,600. But not all of those folks have a core process, right? Most of their work is leadership. So most of the core work mapping is going to be done by frontline groups or secondary managers of managers and not the most senior folks. Their role has been to, of course, use the dashboard, drive this, recognize, go to Gemba walks, but analyze the data, show appreciation to the dashboard. Part of the dashboard design was so that it makes it really easy for any leader to go in or at any level and see what's being submitted and what's happening. So we're really encouraging them telling them to encourage people to use the time to do this, that this is important, make lean coaches available for support, that they report to them, and do the leadership type things that are great, like recognize, coach, and say look for opportunities, etc. So that's their primary role.
All right, that's great. And again, I'm reading from the chat pane, folks. If I miss some, please feel free to reach out them or unmute. From Laura Meyer in Idaho, can you talk about your open houses? What's the format like? How often do you hold them?
Yeah, it's a great question, and Denise might chuckle in this answer. So I've had many jobs in my past, and I once worked in the political arena in Boston. You might tell I'm not an Arizona native, and I worked in the Boston City Council for a few years. And so when I think of open houses, I think about the open houses I would conduct in the district on behalf of the elected official. where people come in and usually they would vent, right? But in other words, we meet them where they're at in questions. So that was the design. And I think there was some confusion on that, right? I had a vision for it. The good news is people showed up and we were adaptable. And I think they wanted us to present again, almost like a mini lunch and learn. So we did a mixture. But the last one we did, I think, was we had more people, and it really was what we hoped for. Tell us where your questions are, your challenges are, right? So, and that also was scheduled about 8 weeks in. So I think people had a better understanding. So once they digested what we're asking and they tried stuff, they had specific questions, and it functioned better. And I think in the future, we're going to continue to do lunch and learns because they're very effective. We've had over 200 people show up for each, and then we record them and put them on the site. And then an open houses, especially when they get into the second and third deliverable, I think they'll really bear fruit because people have more specific questions that allows us and the ambassadors to help them with. And it's really a drop-in. So really they can drop in, ask their question, and they can leave. That's where the open house format comes in.
All right, great, thanks. We have additional ones in the chat pane. One is leadership also has processes. Is anything happening with them as well? Interesting question.
Yeah, so I don't think Denise helped me. I don't think if any of the 472 we've identified would be a leadership process, particularly. We talked about that. We're just thinking about our own org, right? So, I'm a manager, so I have 3 maps, right, for 3 different teams that we're going to map. Kismet Weiss, many may have heard her speak here as part of this. This is our boss. She definitely has a leader process. To give an example, but we didn't ask her to map that. I think from my perspective, what we hope for is that at every level, people outside this initiative, there might be stuff like that, but it's not really baked into the 472 at this time.
All right, that's great. Julie from Lena, Ohio, by the way, put the Lena, Ohio site into the chat pane. Julie, I know we have honorably borrowed from you. All thanks again. There was another question from David, I think. David said, follow up, are they employing and I think he means A3 thinking and process in their management? And so for you all, A3 thinking, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but go ahead and chat about that.
Yeah, so there's also community of practice for all the strategic initiatives. I think it meets once a month. Yeah, it's once a month on a Monday. And we are all asked to submit A3s on our progress, right? So A3 is one of the tools we use for our 8-step problem solving. So for these larger endeavors and communication tool, we use A3s. There's also an A3 format for strategic initiatives outside the problem solving. But just to know, we think about problem solving. It's always 8 steps, but we have, Kaizen follows 8 steps, whether you document it or not. And we have something called a problem solving worksheet where, myself working at a desk on a simple problem, or with my team might use that, but also the A3 for larger scale projects. So we definitely do A3 thinking, and we document these as well as we can.
All right, thanks. Kismet, by the way, from the question about management process, leadership processes, Kismet, who's the Deputy Chief Operating Officer there at ADOT, said the leader process is leader standard work, and you all covered leader standard work a lot, so appreciate that. All right, some other questions, and by the way, we will then roll into open forum, and it's anything for any of our presenters or anything else, so we can continue there also. But are there any other questions we haven't read out that folks here on the online today want to chat in? Well, and those might be coming. Denise and Vinny, thank you. Terrific stuff there. So Mariah, why don't we go to the next slide and invite folks to participate in our open forum. Open forum is anything on your mind. So that's other things for other presenters and for the presenters we had today, things that are on your mind about anything that you want to talk about. I know metrics very often comes up, and then empowerment comes up. And by the way, you also see presenter contacts there. We will be posting the recording as well as the slide deck that we're using today to the Transportation Lean Forums, Lean Interchange website, and these email addresses and all that material will be there also. But this is our open forum. So for the next 30 minutes or so, what's on your mind? Anybody can unmute, and if you can't unmute for some reason, put it into the chat pane and we'll read it out there. Karen has a nice public service announcement in there for the third annual State of Missouri Summit. Thanks, Karen. Great stuff there always. And we'll include that in the follow-up email also, as well as put that into the next Lean Transportation Forum newsletter. Hey, Laura, I think you're trying to speak and we really can't hear you very well. So maybe that's something that we would put into the chat pane. Okay. And again, apologies for technical issues in our virtual age. It's great to have things like Zoom and stuff. Technology is wonderful, except when it's not. And we're certainly running into that, I think, some today. So if you do have issues, please put that into the chat pane. Any questions, thoughts, either for our presenters or just to put in front of the forum generally? So Laura put into the chat pane, I wonder if the ambassadors at ADOT have a belt system, green or yellow or those kind of belt systems for accreditation. So could our ADOT friends address that?
I don't know if Kismet's still on, if you want an answer, but I can answer. We do not use belts at ADOT. The idea of, like I mentioned, everybody, every day, everywhere, solving problems. We did a top-down approach to training leaders, et cetera. So we have a lean leader training for senior and executive level and coaches, and then a manager level series of classes and team member. And we do give certificates of appreciation or completion for the lean leader and the manager, but we don't do a belt system at all. But the main idea for us is that everybody can do this, not just special people. And we want everyone to get AMS knowledge and approach, and it's embedded into our onboarding program for all new employees as well, AMS coaching and training. Hopefully that makes sense. So the ambassadors mentioned on the 3.4, it's just a term we used. That those, yes, they were volunteered. Yes, some might say they were somewhat voluntold, but they represent different parts of the agency. And because of the work we've done over 6 months and problem solving and to implement these countermeasures, right, to get this done, we're just calling them ambassadors for people to know they can reach out to them, and hopefully they're role modeling and talking about this and furthering what we want to do. So we use the term ambassadors. In essence, they're volunteers. They have other jobs, and this problem solving responsibility and role is part of 3.4 initiative.
All right, thanks, Vinny. I do see coming into the chat pane from Nigel. Neil spoke of the last planner, and the last planner is coming from Lean Construction. Has anyone else tried this Lean project delivery approach? From Nigel notes is from Agile for non-IT projects, and there's some experimentation in California. I'll start off. We are looking into that here at CDOT. We have not used Last Planner, but it's part of what we're looking at in terms of trying to get Lean construction going and borrowing a lot from Neil. Neil, I don't know if you want to speak any more to that, or if other folks on the call today have tried Last Planner.
Well, what I'd add to it is that you may remember from the House of Lean that I showed you, it's our #1 pillar, and it has made such a difference. I would say, looking at our program of works for an area that I would be introduced to improve, we'd probably find that about 40% of those projects are being delivered on time. I reckon within 3 months, I can get a system up to about 80–90% of projects being delivered to time and budget. And it also then gives me the opportunity to start making savings. So then I'll be looking at bringing these things in quicker and cheaper and shaving 20% off. What I would say to you is this is the last planner, or I say collaborative planning system, that just a quick bit of history there. The reason we ended up calling it collab planning here in the UK was because of there was a copyright issue about using the term. It was actually developed in the States. Putting that to one side though, it's a system, and the system is this. Don't use it just for when things are going pear-shaped. You know, we'll have a collab planning session. That is definitely not it. It is all about setting your milestones, working from the end sort of backwards. So set your last key delivery milestone, do your interims, then establish what a 12-week look ahead looks like, then do your weekly production meetings, and then do make ready. You know, so in England, we're using this stuff. We use it. I pretty much try and endeavor to get it done on every one of our projects. We still struggle, and I'll tell you, some of our projects are still being hampered by curveballs coming in and tripping them up. So then what we're doing now, we're going into the realms of introducing risk management into the collaborative planning system. So identify the risks and the blockers which are going to stop your project. Do that. And you know, like as you say, you know, you mentioned on that previous presentation, this business about having ambassadors or the lean guys in there. But I always refer to the people who are using the process and using these processes as your experts. So they're the experts, the people who are doing the doing, and they're going to tell you what's going to stop them from doing. And once we've captured that, we put in those mitigations and introduce that into your production meetings at the correct time. It's a struggle, but you know, we're getting there. And if you're going to do anything, collab planning has been a huge advertising medium for lean for us.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Neil. Anybody else? Anybody else want to unmute or put something in the chat pane on the last planner or something like that? All right, well, it's an open question. There's another one coming in from Dwayne Bradbury. How widely is Kanban used to evolve processes to become more lean? So a Kanban system by using the flow of work on a board, some of that kind of stuff. And I invite anybody to chip in. At CDOT on my own team, we're using Kanban. We do that in a virtual world using the Trello app. We use the free version. It seems to be more than sufficient for us. So we're tracking work using a Kanban board. How about other folks? Anybody want to unmute and talk about their use of Kanban?
Oh, yes, it's Dwayne Bradbury here. I was just hoping to get some insights because Kanban is a very unique way to evolve towards lean. So I thought it would be a little bit more popular in the room here, but maybe not.
And Dwayne, I'm sorry, are you from one of the transportation agencies or perhaps another state agency someplace?
I'm actually up here in Canada, in Ontario, in the government up here. Working in the Ontario government in the land and resource cluster, INIT cluster. And Kanban is something I'm promoting in a lot of different areas to evolve their processes to be more lean.
Well, that's great to hear that of your use there, and you know, welcome to the forum. Appreciate that. David put a note in that the enemy of Kanban is batching, and batching tends to be rife in the public sector. Certainly true, David. And it's there's that constant battle. Dwayne, great to hear about that. How about other folks? Other folks using Kanban or Kanban thinking in their agencies.
I can speak to this just a little bit, Gary.
Go for it.
So my name's Kiki. I'm actually a fellow at CDOT in the Division of Transit and Rail, but I was one of Gary's interns in the past where I use a Kanban, and I brought it with me in my other roles. And I would say that it helps my processes become more lean because I can see the transparency of the process altogether, and I can see where my holdups are. So in my personal processes, it kind of helps me to figure out what are my common stop gaps that I can then seek to improve. And then just generally looking at my timing and how long it takes me to bring a project or anything from beginning to end. So I can compare with myself using the information stored on my Trello.
Well, thanks, Kiki. Appreciate that. As Kiki noted, Kiki used to be on my team at CDOT. She's now one of our first cohort of fellows working in our Division of Transit and Rail. Thanks, Kiki. How about other folks? Other folks, Kanban? And Brian from the New York State DOT said using Kanban for tracking work process within the office, that's great. New York State DOT is one of our larger DOTs around. Thanks for that, Brian.
Hey, Gary, this is Vinny Labella. So we don't, use of a Kanban board is not part of our lean training or one of the tools that is endorsed for everyone to use. That said, lots of leaders use it, right? So it's a tool that people use. Most of the use I see of people managing their own work, less for team use. I mean, that's just my observation. I know when we walk around, especially if sometimes even in virtual meetings, people have their Kanban boards behind them. So it is in use. It's not a tool that's rife and embedded in our training, but it's a tool we can support and talk about if that's helpful.
Well, that's great. Appreciate that, Vinny. Brian, I do apologize. I put you in the New York State DOT. You're actually in the Department of Corrections there. And by the way, I do owe you a contact with our Department of Corrections here in Colorado. Stacy and Mariah, if you can nudge me to make sure I do that. All right, Kanban. More about Kanban. Anybody else?
That was great to hear the personal usage of Kanban, because just the first benefit you get from using Kanban is the visual aspect of where everything is. And as you dig into the deep usage of Kanban, once you start limiting your work in progress and starting to get into measuring flow, that's when the real benefits start to come up. But at the surface, it's so wonderfully easy to get that first benefit of transparency and visualization for everyone.
Agree with you completely. Additional note from Brian, it's useful for leveling work within an office. That visual is, that's great. Visualization is great. I've seen on LinkedIn our friends from down under in Queensland and Australia in the postal service there, extensive use of Kanban. They have some terrific pictures online. How about other folks on the topic of Kanban? Or other topics? Are there other topics? Do you have additional questions for Neil and Vinny and Denise, or other folks from the presentation, or just other things on your mind about innovation and improvement here in DOTs and elsewhere in public service? Hedia from Ontario said that Kanban is heavily used in manufacturing. And using it for getting organized personally, that's great. Zach from Idaho said there's some good softwares for Kanban. Encourage anybody who's talked already or other folks to chip in. We use Trello. We looked at a couple of different systems, and I forget what they're called, but Trello was our choice. It's priced at least the version we used is priced at my all-time favorite price point, which is free. How do you use it? Post-it notes. Oh, I love that. I love that. How about other folks? Software you might be using to answer Zach's question?
I've done quite a bit of research in all the different industry tools, and for me, the clear winner is Lean Kit, PlanView Lean Kit. PlanView purchased them about 3 years ago, but Lean Kit is very, very wholesome in creating relationships of boards. Oh, I'm getting feedback there from Laura. Relationships of boards and cards, and you can really build an enterprise layered in Lean Kit. Another great one is Digite. They have a solution, and it's a great one. And Trello, I think, is the other. I think those are the three main players.
That's great information, Zach. Hope that helps.
And Post-it notes. Nothing beats Post-it notes.
All right, appreciate that. Other thoughts, questions around the table, topics, successes you want to crow about? By the way, your success might be somebody else's current issue that they're trying to solve. So learning from each other is a wonderful thing. Laura from Idaho noted Microsoft Teams has Planner app. And so that's great. So how about other things you guys want to bring to the table today? And if you can't unmute, do put it into the chat pane. I'm glad to read those out for you. All right, let me put an issue, a topic on the table, and would love to get folks to chime in, either unmuting or you can put it into the chat pane. We do have a steering group for the Transportation Lean Forum Community of Practice now, well overdue, and glad to have the folks that are on that steering group today. We are actually meeting a bit later today, and would love to know what you would like the Transportation Lean Forum to evolve into, things we ought to keep, as well as things that maybe you think would be good to add on, or things to modify. By the way, at the same time, Laura also does have a question for ADOT. When you're doing standard work at ADOT, do you go to the job breakdown level, instruction level, or keep it at the process map? So those two items, and feel free to unmute or chat about either one. We'd love to know, answer Laura's question from ADOT, as well as from anybody. How would you like us to evolve the Transportation Lean Forum, if at all? We've got these every other month presentations. We have the online Transportation Lean Forums, Lean Interchange website, where we archive a lot of things, not just the recordings but also various tools. We also have a presence on LinkedIn for Transportation Lean Forum. How would you like to have all of that evolve?
Gary, if I can try to answer Laura's question, if I understand it right. So we don't use the JBI term, but I'm familiar with it. And I think what you're asking is, we have standard work templates, a few variations that include, the steps and the how, the more details. And if you want to, you can add the why behind it. And that's what we ask people to do. It's very similar to my understanding of JBI when it was introduced to me. For this particular initiative, we definitely are asking them to match the standard work to whatever the bookends of their process map is. Right. So for this specifically, it'll be hopefully a tight piece of standard work, but we're encouraging standard work for all the processes. And we know one process leads to another. So depending on the team's scope. So hopefully that's helpful, but I would say, yes, our JBI format is what we follow. We just don't use that term.
Thanks, Vinny. Appreciate that. Laura, hopefully that's what you're looking for. And thank you for the kind thought about the presentations. We have wonderful presenters today and always do. That's really good stuff. Other folks, Transportation Lean Forum, either the presentations or the website or the LinkedIn site or other things. Things that we should be considering as we work to evolve Transportation Lean Forum here in our 10th year. Would love to hear from you, and if you don't have the capability to unmute, the text pane is fine. And we do
Gary, I'd like to add something for you, which I think your group should consider, because it's something when we've been, delivering lean here in, Highways England and National Highways as it is now. One area we've been really tool heavy of deploying tools, and we've done our best to drive culture. And it hasn't been until recently that, we've been really making use of behavioral scientists to make this stuff land. So I think you need to consider that. It's such an important thing to get people to buy in, to take them on the journey. Otherwise, we can give people every tool known to man, but if they don't use it, we're going to struggle.
Neil, I appreciate that. Early on, I was paired with some behavioral scientists, and this is probably 30 years ago. Oh no, it's probably longer than that. Sorry, I'm showing my age. And I think that was very helpful to my career. By the way, one of our producers today is Stacy Stoffrigan from my staff. She's a PhD candidate in industrial and organizational psychology, and I think we need more of those kind of folks myself. I know that's just a personal preference on my side, but I think pairing the technical side and the people side, as you note, Neil, is very important. So thanks for that.
No props.
How about other folks on that question? Additionally, there's one coming in, and I'll read it out in text pane. So feel free to answer either one. Assuming that Lean has a caste system, and caste in quotes, how would you address this? And boy, so it's a good question. I think respecting respect for people is one of those key pillars that Vinny and Denise and Neil were pointing out. I think we're imperfect, but that's, I think, respect for people tends to get rid of those caste systems. Anyways, anybody responding to that, that's great. And would love to hear from other folks about how we should evolve Transportation Lean Forum also in the next few minutes. We have about 10 minutes left. And again, if you can't unmute or having some trouble, I know that we have some technical issues today, feel free to put things into the chat pane and we'll read those out. And so David's thoughts, I think, on the caste system, if you keep asking people for ideas to improve things and don't do what they ask, they stop suggesting things. It's about respect. Yeah, definitely. Respect for people. Absolutely agree with you, David.
Gary, from an ADOC perspective, I think I understand what he means by the caste system, but we again, that everybody, every day, everywhere slogan, we try to make it real, that all 3,600, no matter what level, should be doing this, and the leaders have a specific role. That said, we recognize the gap there as well, and this year we did something once a month with the leadership group, which was about 30 meeting regularly. We expanded it to about 150. For the specific purpose to broaden communication and application of AMS. And one of a 90-minute meeting on the second Wednesday of every month was called a reflection stop, and it was dedicated to refresh our spring training kind of approach with the leader group about what's important and to refresh it and recommit to our application of Lean, right? And we did talk, in 6 months, we're taking a break right this month, but we talked about leader standard work, a Gemba walk specifically, coaching, use of a problem register, which where we on our huddle boards, we track problems, and leaders' response to problems and escalation. So that was one of our countermeasures to kind of refocus and eliminate any kind of caste, quotation fingers, I'm doing as I speak. So it's definitely a challenge but everybody has to do this, and the leaders have a specific role modeling and coaching in that respect for people, Gary, as you say.
Thanks, Vinny. Appreciate that. Rod, I see that you put some notes in the text chat pane. Thanks. We do want to keep the forum and keep the community going, and appreciate your thoughts on that. Other folks, either for the question from Lita Clavins or for this overall question, where should we take the Transportation Lane Forum here in our 10th year? Go ahead and put those in the chat pane, or feel free to unmute, and we'd love to hear from you.
Hi Gary, it's Neil here. There's one thing I'd say to you. I had a really interesting conversation and presentation I gave yesterday to the Australian and New Zealand Lean Construction Institute. And a guy came on who said to me, he said, you know, over here currently in Australia and New Zealand, our construction companies are doing really well. We don't need to do lean. So what do you think to that? And I said, well, this is exactly the time you can do lean, because it's the time when you've got the money to spend on your training and do that investment for when the times which are going to go bad. Because I've never known an economy which has been booming for 100 years. So I don't know if things are the same in the States and you suffer from that, you know, if things are doing well. Here in England at the moment, it's bizarre. Some of our construction companies are doing really well, and the other bunch of them have gone bankrupt. We've had quite a few go under recently. So yeah, it's a strange one. So just an observation for the attendees there.
Neil, appreciate that. I look forward to the day when I suffer from having too much money in my budget. I look forward to it. All right, we have about 5 minutes. Additional thoughts, other questions? Heidi from Ontario, thanks. Thanks for your note in the text pane. Other thoughts about the questions? Other questions you want to bring up, or this notion about where we should take the Transportation Lane Forum in our 10th year here? Go ahead and unmute or put something in the chat pane. Kay, thank you for your note in the chat pane. We appreciate that. Laura's note to David Gershwind, yeah, I agree completely. It's about respect for sure. Brian, thanks for your notes, and thanks for joining us from New York State Department of Corrections. You know, it is all about sharing and supporting each other. We're back to Canadian football, 3-minute warning. We have about 3 minutes before we need to go to our last few slides and then wrap up for the day. Other thoughts, questions, ideas that you want to put on the table? Successes are always welcome for sure. Your success might be somebody's current challenge.
Hi Gary, it's Neil here again. So just got me thinking there. Someone mentioned about, you know, capturing ideas and innovations. So when we've been doing, you know, lean interventions, problem solving, when I get to the improved stage, sometimes it's been a bit disappointing with the ideas which are generated. So we've started using, well, we've been using it for a few years now. We've been using TRIZ, Russian technique. If some of you haven't come across it, if you type in TRIZ in Google, it'll probably take you to classical Triz. But I've been dealing with a company over here called Oxford Creativity. So if you look Oxford Creativity Triz, it'll give you more of a flavor of what we're trying to get from it. Basically, what it does, so it gives, it's just it's a technique which gives people a whole load of tools to come up with great ideas, and it just short circuits things. So rather than people sitting there a bit twiddling their thumbs, you know, you can start a conversation about ideality and all this sort of stuff, but some really useful tools to drive innovation.
Wow, Neil, and I might want to follow up with you. You know, I got an original translation of one of the Russian manuscripts on trees. You know, it comes from a Russian researcher back in the 1990s. Either the manuscript wasn't written very well, or the translation wasn't very good because it was hard to follow. But I've always had I've had a lifelong interest in some of the concepts from trees. So I'd love to know what you're doing, and I'm definitely going to follow up with you offline.
Yeah, no problem, Gary, because I could hook you up with the lady which owns Oxford Creativity Triz. You need to speak to her as well, because, as I say, the original translation of Triz is as dry as dust. It's like, if you're struggling sleeping, that's the document to read, isn't it?
Yeah, you said it much better than I could, Neil, and yet the concept seems amazing. So I definitely will follow up with you on that. All right, we've actually come to the end of the open forum. Thanks everybody for that. Mariah, could you roll to the next screen? And first of all, I do want to thank Stacy Stoffergen and Mariah Wagner, two of our intrepid interns here at CDOT. They've been co-producing today behind the scenes, working with our presenters beforehand. Thank you for doing that. There is another community of practice that we help co-found here at CDOT and is useful for us, and it's broader than transportation. It's for anybody in public sector, called Public Sector Change Practitioners Group. The next webinar on that is coming up on October 5th, and a wonderful presenter, Tim Creasy from the ProSci organization, their Chief Innovation Officer. You can see the QR code there. There's availability. There's also a website, and we'll be sure to put that into the notes afterwards. I've always enjoyed listening to Tim, and I look forward to the presentation there. Want to cross-sell that with the TLF session folks today. If you could go to the next one, Mariah. We are currently in our 9th year. In June, we'll celebrate being a decade of a community of practice. Back in 2012, there were 3 DOTs, and now we're, as you can tell, much more expansive than that. The exact date is not yet set. We do have this every other month cadence, and it sounds like from the discussion today, folks do like that. So we're planning to November sometime. If you want to be a presenter, please drop me a note, and we'd be glad to consider that. Next. And that's the end of our session. Again, thank you to Neil and to Vinny and Denise. Wonderful information. A lot of good discussion back and forth. We will push out some of the details of this later on.